Welcome to the Explainer. You know, if you're living outside the US but earning income from it, you've probably heard about Form 1040. But today, we're zeroing in on its really important cousin for non-residents, the 1040NR. So if you're not a US citizen, but you've got money coming in from the United States, you've probably felt a little lost trying to figure out your tax situation. It can honestly feel like a complex puzzle with its own very unique set of rules. But hey, don't worry, that is exactly what we're here for. Today, we're going to decode Form 1040NR. This is the essential tax return for non-resident aliens, and our goal is to turn this confusing maze into a really clear path. All right, let's get right to the most fundamental question. Who actually needs to file this thing? See, before you even think about numbers or forms, you have to figure out if the IRS even considers you a non-resident alien for tax purposes. Literally everything else depends on getting this right. Okay, so the IRS uses two main tests to figure this out. You've got the green card test, that one's pretty straightforward, and the substantial presence test, which basically counts how many days you've been in the US over a 3-year period. If you don't pass either of those, then for tax purposes, you're generally considered a non-resident alien. Now let's talk about the absolute, no questions asked, must-file situations. These 3 things you see here, they aren't suggestions, they are legal triggers that require you to file a tax return. So if you were engaged in a US business, owe some kind of special tax, or got a distribution from, say, a US health savings account, you're on the hook. You have to file. And this is a really crucial point that catches so many people by surprise. Just the act of being engaged in a US trade or business is the trigger. That's true even if you made $0 from it, or even if a tax treaty says that income is tax exempt. It's the activity itself that creates the filing requirement. So what happens if none of those triggers apply to you and you aren't required to file? Should you just, forget about it? Well, not so fast. In a lot of cases, it is absolutely in your best interest to file a return anyway. And the number one reason is super simple: getting your money back. If an employer or a bank withheld US taxes from your income, filing a 1040NR is the only way you can claim a refund if you pay too much. Plus, it's how you claim any tax credits you might be eligible for. Okay, so you've figured out you need to file, but it's not as simple as just grabbing a different form. When you file a 1040NR, you are playing by a completely different set of rules compared to a US resident. Let's dig into some of the biggest differences. As you can see here, one of the biggest changes is your filing status. For US residents, all the options are on the table. But for non-residents, 2 of the most beneficial ones, married filing jointly and head of household, are just not available. And trust me, that limitation alone can have a huge impact on your final tax bill. And here's another big one. You know that simple, large, standard deduction that most US residents can take? Well, for most non-resident filers, that's not an option. You typically have to itemize your deductions, which means you've got to track every single specific deductible expense like state taxes or donations to US charities. And this is a perfect example of why the details matter so much. Tax treaties can completely change the game. Look at this quote. A specific article in the US-India tax treaty carves out an exception, allowing certain students and apprentices from India to take the standard deduction. That is a massive benefit that most other non-residents can't even touch. And it's the same story with popular tax credits. Your ability to claim them is almost entirely dependent on your country of residence because of these tax treaties. You can see residents of Canada and Mexico have pretty good access, while others have very limited access or in many cases, no access at all. Now, to file any of these forms, you're going to need a tax identification number. If you're not eligible for a social security number, then the key that unlocks the entire US tax system for you is something called an ITIN. So let's be crystal clear, an ITIN is not a social security number. It doesn't give you permission to work, and it has nothing to do with your immigration status.
It is purely and only a tax processing number that the IRS uses to identify you.
And the deed for an ITN isn't just for the person earning the income. Look here, if you're trying to claim a spouse or a dependent on your US tax return and they don't have a social security number, well, they're going to need an ITN too.
The application process is basically a package deal. You almost always apply for your ITIN at the exact same time you file your very first tax return. You fill out that Form W-7, you staple it to the front of your completed 1040-NR, you include your certified identity documents, and you mail it all in one big envelope to the IRS.
And while its main job is tax compliance, having an ITIN can really be a stepping stone. It's often a requirement if you want to open an interest-bearing bank account or apply for certain types of credit, so it can actually help you build a financial footprint here in the US.
Wow, okay, we have covered a lot of ground. From figuring out your status to understanding all the unique rules and getting the right ID number. So let's just quickly put it all together and summarize the key action items to get you on the right path.
Following these steps in this order is going to give you a really clear, structured approach. First, know your status. Second, get all your paperwork together. Third, make that decision. Do I have to file or should I file to get a refund? And fourth, if you need it, get that ITN application ready to go with your return.
Look, the rules for non-residents are definitely different, but they are not impossible to figure out. Now that you understand the core ideas behind Form 1040-NR and the whole ITIN process, you are so much better equipped to handle your US tax obligations. The real question is, what other tax treaty benefits might be out there just waiting for you to discover?